Still, we're getting another lot. What does Jimmy say?
Jimmy says nothing.
Right-o, let them through.
The 28th day of November, the Tans left the town of Macroom. They were armed in 2 cross-lead tenders, which sped them along to their doom. But the boys of the column were ready, with hand grenades primed on the spot. And the Irish Republican Army made an end to the whole bloody lot. Then here's to the boys of Kilmichael, the gallant, the brave and the true, who fought under Ball Tommy Barry and conquered in the red, white and blue. Then here's to the boys of Kilmichael, the gallant, the brave and the true, who fought neath the green flag of Erin and conquered in the red, white and blue.
The 28th day of November, 49 years ago today, Tom Barry and the 36 men of the flying column of the 3rd West Cork Brigade shot their way into Irish legend. And that clip of film from the Dawn, made in Kerry before the war, catches something of the atmosphere of the time. The words of the best-known of IRA ballads, The Boys of Kilmichael, sums up in a pithy chorus the impact of the battle. For the first time on that road between Macroom and Dunmanway, a force of auxiliaries was ambushed, attacked, and defeated. The auxiliaries, all former commissioned officers who'd served on at least one front in the British forces, had arrived in Macroom and other parts of Ireland in August of 1920. They scoured the countryside, arresting and assaulting suspects and innocents alike, a campaign of raids and murder designed for a single purpose: terror. The challenge to these professionals at Kilmichael came from 36 men with only 1 week's training before the battle, armed with guns and ammunition captured in earlier raids in Bantry and Kilbrittain and at an engagement at Turin. They'd marched through 26 miles of a cold, wet November, and among those who lay in wait from 8:15 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon were Jim Spud Murphy, Jim Crowley, Jack Hennessy, who was wounded in the engagement, Ned Young, Pat Donovan, Tim O'Connell. Joining these legendary boys of Kilmichael in the 7-day studio tonight are other survivors of that West Cork Brigade, Michael Crowley, Christy O'Connell, Dr. Eugene Nudge Callanan, and the man who commanded them then and commands our attention now, General Tom Barry. General, you are among the happy survivors, and who in this studio tonight do you miss most?
Well, before I'd answer that question, I would like to say, Brian, that we're only a sample here of the fighting men of West Cork. And Kilmichael was only one of many, many engagements. Now, you were good enough to bring us together tonight and to allow us to meet again. But I would like to say that we are only a representative of a far, far bigger body. Now, I suppose 2/3 of the fighting men of West Cork are dead and gone, but still 1/3 of them are there. And these men are not forgotten tonight by us, their comrades who are here. We are in the happy position of being survivors, and nobody can tell why any one of us survives. But I want to say just one word. I know our time is limited. That without the men in the battalions and the companies, and without the other fighting men who are not here, and without the help of the Comnaman and above all the people, the poor people of West Cork, who stood behind us through thick and thin, there'd be no survivors here. And this battle and this fight right through during the period from the end of 1919 or beginning 1920 onwards was one in which we lost 64 men killed altogether, and they are in our thoughts tonight. But I want to make it clear we're only a sample. Now, with regard to the fight at Kilmichael, it was probably the bloodiest fight in Ireland, because the West Cork Brigade column, from the time it was organised, it never mounted an attack on the British military, police, TANs, or spies or informers or anybody else. That it didn't mount the attack from 5 to 7 yards range. And I think that was one of the main reasons of our success. And another reason, of course, was that the type of men that did form the West Cork Brigade, that they were men who were dedicated men, and men who had proved in their lifetime, and many of them by their deaths, that they were men who were not going to remain members of the subject race. Now, we'll have to go on to the Ogsies. These were all commissioned.
For a second, General, if I may interrupt, let's ask Pat Donovan, what was it like? Do you remember waiting that Sunday?
Yeah, we were a long time waiting because I had to wait so long already.
Do you remember what you thought about? Had you shot at a man before?
What?
What were you thinking about as you waited there?
Oh, we were waiting for the lorries to come on. That's what we were thinking about all day. We were waiting all day. And that's what we were thinking about the whole time. Never know when they come on.
Spud Murphy, were you nervous that day?
I was never nervous in my life.
Were you less nervous after the event than before? Put it that way.
I was nervous before or after it.
Nudge Callanan, you weren't there, but why do you think the Ogsies had to be knocked?
Well, because they were terrorising the countryside, and if they weren't met at that stage, I don't know what happened to fight.
And yet for a long time there wasn't fighting, Jack Hennessy. For a long time people apparently were prepared to simply sit underneath it. What made people in West Cork different, would you say? Or were they different to people elsewhere in the country?
I would say that at that time, towards the end of 1920, the pressure was mounting, and that these people, these Ogsies, had gone right through Ireland, burning and shooting and pillaging. And they had to be stopped. And the position that was selected to stop them was either they would come out of it or the IRA would come out of it. None of the two lots would come out of it, because these would have taken no prisoners to Macroom, and they had to be stopped. And I, for one, anyway, would have been satisfied to lose 10 men to wipe out the 16 or 17 of them. And of that, we were proud that we were able to do it, even though we were men without experience in the main. We were men that had never met these fellows before, and we were men that were suffering from a fear of these chaps, that they had gone through Ireland terrorising and shooting and killing, and we were wondering if we didn't stop them, could the country take them? There were 1,500 of them there, backed up by some 30 or 40,000 troops and by I don't know how many thousand black and tans. But these fellows were the ace terrorists. The morning of it, there was undoubtedly a tough baptism of fire, because outside one or two of the men who were at Kilmichael, they had never been in action before. And they got a tough time because they started marching and marching through rain, and from the rain, it froze as soon as they got to Kilmichael. And they knew, and they were told that Kilmichael, that either they or the other fellows would come out of it. As it happened, these fellows didn't relish close quarter fighting. And most of the fighting finished up on the road. Now, there was one problem, and the problem was how to slow them down. And we had luck. The ball hopped our way. And we had the luck of deciding that an officer would stand on the ditch facing them as they came along in full equipment and that. Map case and bomb and the rest of the thing. Uniform. Volunteer uniform, of course, not British uniform, as the British tried to say. And that they'd be bound to
slow down.
To slow down. We didn't want to stop them altogether, but to slow down so that they'd investigate. And they did slow down. And they came, and the bomb was thrown, and a gun opened on them. And with a lot of luck again, the bomb landed at 25 yards or 30 away, while they were coming on down to it. It landed in the front seat. That gave us the advantage of surprise. In guerrilla warfare, surprise and mobility and toughness of men. Now these men, the test not alone was of their courage of these men who fought there, but there was a test of endurance and toughness, because they marched all night through rain. They had nothing to eat all day except one bastable cake was sent down, and a bucket of tea from poor people who probably gave us what they had themselves. And they had to stick out. It started to freeze, and some of their clothes got stiff. But they stuck that out. And they fought a battle, and it was a vicious battle and a bloody battle. And it was hardly a fair battle to put men who weren't experienced in warfare in against these bunch of terrorists, toughs, who ranked and whose ranks were given. They were wearing medal ribbons, DSOs and MCs, whose ranks were given in their death roll when they announced the 17 dead as captains up to colonel. They were commanded by a colonel. Well, I'm not going to go into details because we haven't much time. But they got a test again then. They had to march back, and they had to sleep in their clothes that night inside in a cottage, lying on straw, some 12 miles the way we went back across Man's Bridge and into an empty labourer's cottage. Well, these men actually, after what happened, the British left them there for a good many hours, and they knew they were ambushed, but they didn't come out because they thought we had a large force. Now, we had all the rifles in the brigade, which is about 36 at the time there. We captured 17 rifles there and 34 revolvers and a few bombs off them. And we got the most important thing, their notebooks. And I might say now, for the public record, that every one of them that was searching for information, they carried a flask full of brandy, which they had looted.
General, any guerrilla force in any country depends very much on the people. It lives off the people. What were the people like in West Cork, and what way of life had they got?
Well, out in that part of the country is a bleak, cold country with poor people there. It's a different Kilmichael to now. But the people there were poor, and the people were eking a living out, and they were the people that backed the IRA. And actually that day now, the morning, some of them were going to Mass, and very nicely I spoke to them, and I said, look, we're waiting for a fight here. They all went back, and there was no word passed to anybody. We were waiting there 8 hours, which is a risk.
How were the people able to feed you if they were
They didn't
poor?
feed us there at that time, because the first feed we got from Saturday night at 6 o'clock was Sunday night when we got into Granure, into the labourer's cottage, and the local men from the Balnacarriga Company, they came along and they got Bastable cakes and they got bread, they got cakes and butter for us, and they got buckets of tea, and that was their feed. It's a fallacy to think that men must be fed this way and that way. The West Cork men were never fed, and even at actions after that, at Crossbarry, they had no food from 6 o'clock in the evening. They fought all night, and they marched all day, and they got their breakfast at 4 o'clock in the evening, which was a breakfast of tea and bread and butter. It didn't damage them anything. I think if you look at the world today and where fighting is going on, that some men have been overfed. I won't mention what nation they are, because the hungry fellows are holding them.
As the fighting went on, and as the British occupation got more under attack, and as you began to burn houses because you had to, was there anything you were able to do for the people of your own locality beyond offering them freedom sometime in the future?
Because the people of West Cork backed us, and it was one of the, you mentioned the burning of houses. They started the burning and we finished it. Because we raised the ante every time that they burned. After Crossbarry, they burned, for instance, 6 houses. Our people's houses, labourers' cottages and that kind of thing. And we burned 12 of the big houses, including castles and anything we came along. And the people that cried out first were the British loyalists in Ireland, because they pointed out at that time at the House of Lords, you see that, appealing to the British to stop burning because they were losing 6 times, 10 times, 20 times the value of what the British had burned.
Why do you think the people backed you so thoroughly in West Cork?
Why what?
Why did the people back you so thoroughly?
Because they knew we were right. And you see, people who aren't born then will never really appreciate the spirit that the men of 16 put in to the people afterwards. They came along, and these men were men who, in my opinion, and the opinion of every volunteer I met at the time, they were the greatest men of our generation. You can have all the rest of them, because these men of 16 went out and they did the job. They didn't do any parading, and they didn't do any banner waving before it, but they did it. And I would say again, another factor in the backing of the people was the viciousness of the way the British killed them afterwards, and their prisoners of war. These things the people knew at that time, and they got their share of terrorism in West Cork. And civilians were beaten and shot up, and they were not alone by the Tens and the Augusts, but by regiments like the Essex. We had some regiments coming in, operating there, who operated as soldiers. We had others that came in there, and they only operated as murderers. And that was because their officers were murderers and sadists. Men like Percival, who surrendered 92,000 men afterwards in Singapore to a force of 18,000 with only about 40 casualties. These were the types of men they had to deal with in West Cork.
Could I ask you all, as you look back half a century ago, what were you fighting for? You were fighting for Irish freedom. What do you think we've done with that freedom in this last 50 years? Was your fight worthwhile? Ned Little.
I think so. I think it was. That's why.
Would you do it again?
I would.
No regrets?
No regrets.
At that time, the only idea we had in our mind was to get rid of the enemy in our midst. The enemy that was governing our country, that we wanted to get rid of England. We accomplished that. We felt, no matter what happened after that, well, we felt we had done our bit. That was our objective. Personally, that was mine anyway. I had no other ideas beyond that, except to get rid of the enemy, get freedom.
Christy O'Connell?
Well, yes, of course, our country was under a foreign army of occupation. We were under foreign domination, and that's why we went out to fight.
What could you do for the people, and what do you think the people got out of that fight?
Well, we didn't get anything out of it. I went into exile myself after it. I don't know what the people benefit. Well, some people did benefit. I think, well, there are better conditions now than there were in our time. There's the higher standard of living, of course. But still in all, the country isn't what we expected it to be, I think.
Why? What hasn't happened that you'd have liked
Well,
to
first
see?
of all, we still have the partition with us, and so we have the old evils with us of immigration and unemployment.
Nudge
In our
Callanan?
part of the country, especially in West Cork.
Nudge Callanan?
Yes?
The Ireland you fought for, is it anything like being here yet?
Well, with the exception, as I say, of our Fort Greenfield, we have gone a long way. Our people, you need only go around the countryside to see our farm holdings now, which are second to none.
Farm holdings, Tom Barry, enough of them for enough people?
Enough people? For what?
Enough people on the land? Has this been achieved?
At the moment, there are not, of course. And this idea of, at the moment, one of the things that's worrying us fellas, to keep our own people in Ireland, is that the whole best part of the country seems to be going over to foreigners and large ranches and that kind of thing. And that was certainly nothing that we visualized. We do not purport now at our age to tell anybody or any group of people or Dolly and anybody else. But the fact is that we're worried about it, that if this country is to go back to the days of the privileged classes and the big landlords and the big industrialists, and that if our people are always to be living in foreign countries and living in cities under conditions where, which aren't indeed very nice. But we people think that most of our businesses go along any place in Cork City now. And every week there's some place taken over by the foreigners. In the same way, you find in the country, in the best parts of the country, that every foreigner, British, American, and German, and everybody else, they're coming in here and they're buying up land. And that is something that should be stopped, and if it isn't stopped, I foresee, in a very short time, because we can't talk for very many years, I foresee serious trouble. That the attitude of mind, and take for instance tourism. I know tourism is a factor in any country, but if tourism is to mean that all our people will only get employed here as waiters and porters and waitresses and chambermaids, then that isn't the Ireland that these men fought for. I'm not blaming any particular party. I don't belong to any particular party, but I do go around the country and I meet people and I see things. And I will say that while we know that there has been progress made, and we know there are a lot of honest men trying to do it, the fact of the matter is that that progress is not leading to the Ireland that all these men that died in West Cork and all over the country died for.
What went wrong? What went wrong?
Well, what went wrong was this, perhaps circumstances, you see, we are a poor country, and it will be a terrible feather in the cap of whoever puts us right. And I would say that we went in to follow too closely the economies and the social aspirations of people in Britain and that kind of thing. No, I have no objection to any man. I'm not a socialist, I'm an individualist. And I've never met a West Cork man during that period who said he was a socialist. But we are people, nevertheless, who had a sense of social justice and a sense of direction. We might be able to express it as well as economists and social program people. But we do know that there is growing up now a privileged class of very great wealth, and at the same time we have too much poverty and two people below the line. Who's to blame for it? I'm not blaming anybody, but it's a fact. And it is one of the things that we, near the end of our days now, would like to see stopped. It isn't up to us to stop it. We're not deputies. We're not people who can influence anybody now.
But Tom Barry, if you were 20 again, heading into the 70s instead of heading into the 20s.
If what?
If you were 20 now,
yes.
What would you do?
What
and
would I do?
What would you fight?
If I was 20 now, there's many more things I would have done. But I am not 20, and as I said, we're not lecturing anybody, but we're stating facts, how we feel, at least how I feel. That the effort, great efforts have been made. Men work very hard. But there is that difference between men of poverty and wealth, and it is increasing, the same as it is done in the United States, and the same as it is done all over the world, and the same as it is done in Germany, and for many more countries so far as I know. But it is one of the things that we're not quite happy about. I'm not blaming anybody for it, and I'm not lecturing anybody about it, but you asked the question, and I'm answering for myself anyway. I made clear to you that I have much use for people going around shouting banners and all, raising banners and shouting about, I don't know what you call them, mayors, Trotskyites, Tears, Leninists and all the rest of this stuff, who go along shouting, but they don't seem to do anything about it. They go along upsetting everything, and still in all, the demonstration is over, and the position remains the same.
What would you do if you were a young man? Where would you begin?
Well, no.
Your enemy was your enemy. You could
I don't
see.
think that's a fair question to ask me.
We'll start a revolution.
Would you start a revolution? And was there a revolution 50 years ago?
Well, if conditions weren't today, I suppose we would.
Well, if Tom was 20 again, the country would be in the very same state as it was when Tom was 20, so he'd do the very same thing.
Yes, yes. You start a revolution anyway.
Would you
We'll
do the very
revolt
same
anyway,
thing?
against.
What?
Would you do the very same thing?
Under the circumstances, yes. You see, we weren't fighting for a certain social system in the main. We had a social outlook, because the West Cork men, anyway, when some of these loyalist informers and spies were shot, we divided their land up without any references at all to anybody else. And we put the workers working on it, because at the time, of course, these men were out of work. We burned these fellows out, and we drove them out, and the land was there, and these men had to live, and they were put on the land until settled times come. Now, we had no authority to do that, but we did it. And another thing to show that we had a social outlook that may not be recognized, that their lands were confiscated, given to the workers. Their cattle were sold for the alms fund. Their sheep and their pigs were often loaded, and potatoes and the rest of them were often brought up to the poor part of the country, the people that only saw, as they say in West Cork, butcher's meat once a month. We did that. And we've no apology for doing it. We had no right to do it, of course. We were running an army. But Darlene was up here in Dublin. And they were sitting around passing resolutions and all that. But we were faced, the men in the field are faced with all these problems. You were faced with other problems that you got very little help from. I'm not saying that the people I'm not attacking our headquarters at all now, or I'm not attacking Darlene. But the circumstances of guerrilla warfare and people struggling for freedom, all red tape is gone. Your first duty is to keep alive and keep your men alive. Your second duty is to look after the people who were supporting you and who you were trying to raise from a status of serfdom and from second-class citizens and from people who we were a subject race, and that's all about it.
You were a generation with a great pride in your own sense of authority. You weren't very much afraid of established authority. I'm thinking here of the trouble you had with the church, for instance, in Cork.
No, there was a tense feeling at that particular period that these had to be stopped, or else it would be the end of our generation. If we failed at Kilmichael, these men will bear me out. I told them there, I said, if we fail in this fight today, I said, it looks as if we'll have to wait for another generation to raise us from being a subject race. They were told that, and they were told that either the other fellows would come out, or they'd come out, that the two would not come out of it afterwards. Because the whole position of the fight was, and the position was a bad ambush position, but it was a position where they couldn't get out of once the fight was joined, or we couldn't get out of it if we were beaten. We had to look, all hopped our way. And as I said a while ago, we'd been satisfied to lose 10 or 12 men to wipe these terrorists out, because they were undoubtedly having a bad effect on, not alone our area, but all over the country.
Did you find the way the people dealt with you after Kilmichael, they were more prepared to accept you, that they were more prepared to shelter you, that they were more on your side?
Oh, definitely, yes. They felt it was a great victory for the Irish people.
And what about the people who didn't agree? What about the loyalists? Do you think that they got more resistant to change?
No, I'd say they got more quieter because they were afraid to show that they were in opposition. They saw after, we'll take Kilmichael, they saw that the Irish, the army was just as determined to win their fight as the English were to resist. So therefore, they felt, well, if we don't back down and keep quiet, we'll get the works the same as the Auxies got.
And none of you have regrets? Well. None of you have any regrets?
I have. No, none.
What about
it cost a good man. We didn't start on them in time. If we had started 3 or 4 men to court-martial them and try them and have the evidence examined, we would undoubtedly have saved a good many volunteers' lives. These fellows were selling. That's the only regret I have, anyway.
And you wouldn't even now embark on the possibility of a blueprint or even a vision of Ireland, if you think of, you brought Ireland into the 20th century. Yes. And what sort of an Ireland do you want to see going out of the 20th century?
Well, now, the answer to that is this. It is you people who have the future. It isn't us. There's nobody here under 70. Most of us are well over it. And I wouldn't dare answer that question, because that is something for yourselves. We have our own views on what we'd like to see happening. But I think there'd be an importance on our part to tell the younger generation, nobody told us what to do. Why the devil can't you go along and do it yourselves, the same as we had to do it?
Well, would you tell us what we should avoid?
It's a matter for yourselves, how far you're prepared to go, what you want. And I do think that it's not a fair question to all men who are over 70 years of age and who are near the end of the road. But we couldn't go to anybody. If we went to the older generation and we asked them, what should we do? If we did do that, we didn't do it. Of course, they'd have told us, go home and have sense. And these people, you see, age makes people different. And if you don't do something, nobody will ever do it. It is you do all these things. You had Pat Deasy killed at Kilmichael. He was aged 16 years of age. He died with a rifle in his hand, fighting. You had Jim Sullivan Nakawadra killed at Kilmichael. He died at the age of 19. You had Mike